So I'm going to be using this scene to demonstrate how to set up volumetric scattering in Houdini and Redshift. So I have this flashlight here, and all it contains, so let me just hide the flashlight. So really, what's inside the flashlight is just a spotlight that's shining light down. And then I put this flashlight in here to demonstrate to you how light looks like with volumetric scattering turned on. So we just render this as is. It looks nothing like that screenshot I showed at the beginning. That's because volumetric lighting isn't turned on. And I don't even have a Redshift ROP placed down in my out context yet. So I wanted to walk through this process with you. So let's put down a Redshift. So for the Redshift ROP, the IPR, I'm going to turn off progressive rendering because I like it to come out faster. Let's render this. So it still looks nothing like what I had at the beginning. I don't have those light rays. Now light needs to bounce off something in order for you to see it. So right now you see this circle appear because the light is bouncing off the ground plane. Now if I hide the ground plane, we won't even see that circle. We only see light bouncing off the rubber toy. So let's turn on the ground plane. Let's go back to our out context, to our ROP. Go to Redshift tab. Let's go to the Redshift tab. Go to the volumetric scattering and let's enable it. Let's press the render just in case. But it still doesn't have those light rays that I showed in the first screenshot. So there's also something else you need to know about volumetric scattering. For the light, for the particular light that you're using to power the volumetric scattering, go to the light tab, scroll down. For the volume contribution scale, you have to set this to a number greater than 0. So let's try 0.1. So now we're starting to see something. We're starting to see that light ray traveling through our fog medium, which is the air in this case. Let's turn it up. Let's turn it higher, 0.4. So you have a nice look at it. Now, it's still not that great because these areas right down here, it's really harsh lighting. Like, this is a harsh shadow, which it shouldn't be that harsh. We should have a bit of light here. These darker areas are way too dark. Light bounces off a material, and that's how we see it. But it also bounces off another material a second time. So light can travel down here, bouncing off the ground, and it can travel and bounce off something else. So obviously we have none of that right now because this is completely dark. Let's go back to our out context, the ROP. Redshift tab, global illumination. Now primary GI engine, this is for the first light ray bounce. Basically it's we select an engine to the algorithm, the engine that will calculate all the light ray algorithms and all the hard math for us in order to determine how to render the first light ray bounce. The first light ray bounce will illuminate other objects around it. Primary GI engine affects the first light ray bounce. So let's pick brute force. According to the Redshift documentation, the brute force GI engine is the most basic GI engine. It doesn't attempt to interpolate any results and as such is very accurate but also the slowest. So this is quoted straight out of the Redshift documentation. But it's not the most efficient. Out of these four, there's probably more ways and better ways out there, but out of these four in Redshift, brute force is out of the four is the most accurate one. So I'm going to select brute force for the first one, And we're starting to see some bounce. We're starting to see the first light ray bounces already. We're starting to see a little bit of light scattering, illuminating over here. Now there's also a secondary GI engine. The second GI engine controls the second light bounce after the first bounce. So you have your primary GI engine, which is the first light bounce that bounces off, for instance, the ground in this scene. And then there's another ray that shoots out from the ground onto objects around it. And furthermore, the light bounces off that surrounding object, illuminating the scene further. I'm going to turn off the first GI engine. The first bounce would be light bounces off the ground. That's this. And light continues to bounce. There's like a second bounce, a third bounce, a fourth bounce. It'll continue and it'll go on forever. However, we don't need that level of detail in order to get a render. Like, we don't need a perfect condition. There's the GPU will go nuts. So what we have is engines that will imitate how light travels in real life. So I'm going to choose brute force for both. It's probably a good idea if you have a really heavy scene. Like in this case, in this scene, this is a very simple setup. So it renders pretty fast, like 2 seconds. That's nothing. But if you have a really heavy scene, like a lot of lighting, a lot of objects, and a lot of things to bounce off of, and a lot of like water materials or refraction happening or reflections. For the secondary GI, you can try using the irradiance point cloud to optimize your renders. Irradiance point cloud is sort of a semi-interpolated light map of nearby pixels. Irradiance point cloud computes light rays in a similar way as the brute force algorithm, but takes advantage of the fact that nearby pixels have similar light values and only computes the pixels in groups, thus saving in computation time. Due to interpolation, that means that the irradiance point cloud isn't as accurate compared to the brute force. But for this case, I'm just going to use brute force. As you can see here, it's not all that great. I see that all this like noise down here. It's sort of very spotty. In order to make this more smooth, we need more samples. But you need to be aware, once we start turning up the samples, the render gets harder and harder and harder. It gets longer to render. So for the brute force GI rays, I'm going to up this to 32. And you can see that it looks a lot more smoother. So let's keep turning this up. 64. And it's a lot better now. Now let's keep going. Because this is a simple scene, I can turn it up like this. If you have a more complex scene, like more objects and more things to bounce off, turning this up will be very costly. It'll really slow down your computer and the rendering speed. So this looks a lot more, it looks a lot better. The light bounces, it looks smoother. Let's go back to the objects. Let's go to the light. In the light, we can actually turn up the scale of the GI, which is the light bounces. We can turn off the intensity of it if we wanted to. So if we wanted this part to be more lit up by light bounces, so that would mean that we want more soft light, we can actually turn this up, and all this part becomes is more lit up. It's more intense. So I'm going to turn this back down. So you can see here this spot. Let's focus on this little spot right here. Actually, let me go back to here. And I'm going to turn off the GI completely so that we don't have light bounce. So we can see a very harsh light here. It's a very hard outline of the shadow on the leg of the rubber toy. Once we turn on the light bouncing, it softens it up a little bit. And it becomes this soft light will be a key tool into making your scenes look really awesome. Soft light usually makes everything look a lot better. That's not true, but it makes a lot of in a lot of scenarios, soft light can be used to really bring out key features in a scene. In our light that's powering the volumetric scattering, there you need to know under the light tab, in the volume section, under the contribution scale, there's a samples. Now what this controls is it controls it can reduce the noise within this light, the actual light rays. So when we enabled the volumetric lighting, we got this light ray sort of shooting out from the flashlight. So if I zoom in, it's a bit grainy. Now I'm going to turn up the sample from 16 to 32. It's gone a lot smoother. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to go 64. This is a subtle effect, but it really showed. Let me turn it back down. Let me turn to 8 samples. So this is really grainy. You can see how there's like noise all over the place. So let's go from 18 to 64. I want a huge jump. I want you to see the what this parameter can do. So that's a huge difference from before. This flashlight, this light rays coming out of the flashlight has gone a lot smoother. So that's what this parameter does. But by turning this volume sample up higher for this light, it will cause more computation time for your computer. So it's quite costly as well. I'm going to turn this back down. Actually, just keep rendering. Turn it back down to, so 16 was the default. We can even control how this flashlight falls off at the edge of the light rays. So this light ray here, we can soften it a bit so it's not as, so this line isn't as harsh. If we go to the light tab, scroll down to the spot where it has fall off angle. So let's put this as 0 so we know where the fall off starts off with. So this is with 0 fall off angle. So it's a harsh light ray right down here. Now let's turn this up to like 60. So please note this light ray right here. So it starts off with this where that line was, and it goes 60 degrees inward toward the middle of the light. And it starts to fall off here, 60 degrees here. And it falls off down there. So let's put this at 0 again. This is the harsh light ray right here, this line right here. I'm going to do 20. So it starts to, it's more, it starts off here and it goes 20 degrees inward and it starts to fall off right here. So you can see the center here is more concentrated with more light compared to what we had at 60. 60 had really dimmed it a lot more in the middle. So let's go back to 0 again. So 5 degrees is just slightly inwards. Let's try 10 then. 10 we can really see it. It's like right here. Starts here and it starts to fall off. So it's this 10-degree area here. We have this fall off area. So it really softens this line a bit. So let's put this back at 5. That's what the default is. Now the fall off curve, I believe it's the curve down here. It starts to fall off like that, like a curve. I'm not 100% sure, but if you up it, let's go to 100. You start to see, oh, that's too much. 10. So if I set 10 as the fall off curve, I start to see an outline here. it sort of, I believe it's curving the light ray down here. So it starts to fall off right here. So there's more light down under, and then in the middle at this area. So let's put 0 for this, for the fall off angle. So we have, we are only seeing the curve. We see nothing. Now if we put 5 again, out of that 5 degree here, I believe it's using the curvature from that 5 degree. So if I go like 10 for the fall off angle, there we start to really see it. We see that we see the fall off of the angle first of all, and then it starts to curve a little bit to soften it, this part a lot. Let's try 0. Let's try 1, which was the default to really see. So this is what we had before. There's a sharp, very sharp light on the ground. Now, this is what we have for 10, which softens that a lot. So these two parameters are different ways to soften the light. I'm not sure how the fall off curve is calculated, but I find that it affects how the light looks on an object. It softens the edges when it shines on an object. So if you want a soft light look on the object, like this, for instance, this edge, if you want to soften this edge on the object where the light is shining on it, then try upping this parameter. But remember, if it seems like these two parameters are, this parameter curve relies on the angle. So without the angle, it's a sharp, because it's a sharp edge, because there's no fall off angle. So curve is calculated based on the angle. So out of the 10 degrees, it curves that little bit. Now, I could be wrong, but that's what I've experienced. There isn't any, I couldn't find any documentation in Redshift about the fall off curve. There is some on the fall off angle, but there isn't anything mentioning the fall off curve. So I'm gonna add a dome light. Yeah, it's too bright. So this dome light, I'm gonna turn it down. 0.02. Just slightly, so you can see the flashlight. Now this is a very cheap way to light up the entire scene. If I really wanted to be realistic with the lighting, because in real life, if you had one flashlight in a completely dark room, you can still see, if the flashlight is close enough to the floor, you can see the outline of the flashlight from the light bounces. The light ray bounces will illuminate the flashlight outline. But in order to reproduce that with light rays, and instead of using a cheat way to do it, like how I have this light dome, so let me turn it off. If I really wanted to illuminate the entire room with only light rays, I would have to up this. I have to up the light for sure. Let's go 300. And then the GI scale, because we need the global illumination. We need the secondary bounces of the light to illuminate the rest of the scene. Let me turn this even higher. Now we started to see the edge. It's really hard to get it to illuminate the entire scene, is what I'm trying to show you. As you increase the scale of the GI, it becomes more grainy. There's more noise. It's harder to calculate. So it gets really noisy, and it doesn't look pleasant. We can try going to the raw and illumination, and then increase the number of bounces. So 9. Go back up to here. Turn this back to 10. It gets really grainy really quickly. Okay, I put a small object right behind this larger rubber toy. I put a smaller rubber toy right behind him. So the little guy is hiding in the shadows of the larger rubber toy. The larger rubber toy is blocking all the sunlight. So the smaller object, the smaller rubber toy, doesn't get illuminated at all. Well, a little bit. You can sort of see him a bit of him on the side, on his head. You can sort of make it out a little bit. But what I wanted to show is, so this light, I'm going to turn it back down to 100. And then turn up the GI scale to 10. Now that really illuminates it. This intensifies, this increases the intensity of the light bounces. So the little rubber toy, the smaller rubber toy, is being illuminated by light bounces. So if we go here, I can, I'm not sure what this will do to my GPU. Up the light ray bounce. Ah, that's a lot better. Now you can really see a lot of the outline. Let me turn up the resolution as well, because I'm rendering this at 640 480. So let's turn up the camera resolution to 10K. This is gonna take a while. It's actually a lot faster than I thought it would be. So let's go. Okay. So you can really start to see the outline. But the flashlight was too far away. I couldn't really, no matter how much I turned up the intensity of this light and up the light rays, I couldn't illuminate this. You can illuminate your scene with just GI bounces. It's very costly. So in order to sort of cheat, so I'm going to turn this back. In order to cheat, I used a dome light here. So I'm going to turn the dome light back on. Now this illuminates everything very quickly, and I'm still rendering at HD. So this doesn't cost much. Oh, I forgot to turn this down. What is turned down? The GI scale, sorry. GI scale, turn the GI scale back to 1. Now this can illuminate the rest of the scene very quickly. I can see almost everything. I can see the flashlight. I can make that out. So this is a cheap trick to illuminate your scene if by using multiple light sources. This scene file contains a light and the flashlight. Now the flashlight is parented to the light. So what this means is that if I move the light, it'll move the flashlight. So this is very convenient. I can just move the light anywhere I want in the scene, and the flashlight, the geometry of the flashlight will just follow. So why would I need that? This is because my light is hidden inside the flashlight. Now the flashlight is just gonna change this. Okay. The flashlight is just a cylinder, 2 cylinders, with an open-ended side on the head. That's where I put the light. A spotlight. I believe this is, yes, that's where I put the spotlight, right inside, so light can shine through. Now, as I move the light anywhere in the scene, it's always pointing towards the rubber toy. This is because in the light, under the look at options, I have the toy geometry for the look at attribute, I have the toy geometry. So the light will always be looking toward the toy geometry in the middle, no matter where you're moving the light. If I move it, even if I move it like up and down, up and down, it's always pointing towards the toy geometry, which is centered in the middle. So it's always going to be pointed towards the center. I've included this Houdini file for you to download if you want to check it out. However, it will not include this redshift light. Instead, I'll put a different light on here, so then you can switch it with your own redshift light. As well as the materials that I've used, I will not be including these, but I will include sticky notes with these parameters. That's because it goes against the Redshift user's license to share these, so that's why I can't include them. Thank you for watching and sticking to the end.